items that are pretty high topic ones for people as they talked about this. But let's start off with a prayer, and then we'll jump right in. Heavenly Father, thank you, God, for just being with us today, Lord, for providing this beautiful day, this sunshine, the warm air, Lord. We thank you for just being with us as we travel today to learn more about your word here tonight. Lord, we just ask that you bless all those in classes, bless those teachers and those servants who are taking care and teaching. And Lord, just thank you for this church here in Garland that you've blessed and that we're able to assemble in. And Lord, just be with us tonight as we learn more about what we struggle with, Lord, that being anger. And Lord, we just pray that through this we can learn more how to control things and to be more ultimately like your Son. We just thank you for him and what he has done for us. In his name we pray. Amen. Okay, so I kind of gave it away. We're going to be talking about anger. This is the list as we're going to be going through. We're doing an 8-week, and we can't do the 10-week because we're running into some issues with scheduling, but we might come back and do the other ones, the 2 and 1. But last week we talked about laziness, and this week we're going to talk about anger. And eventually we'll go through cursing, pride, attending church, change and conflict, being discouraged, and over-anxious. And a lot of those came up in our survey last week when we started inputting one of the things that we struggle with. So it's interesting to see that, we all have common struggles as we work through things. And so tonight we're going to be talking about this common theme of anger. And really, what is anger when you think about it? And like I said, I like to use memes with cats, or dogs. This one's like he's happiness challenged. And another one that I liked with this baby, I do not need anger management. They need to stop hiring stupid people. So that's how sometimes you feel at work, or even when you're being served by somebody at McDonald's. You can get pretty angry, and then just this image of the eagle was just really funny because I'm on a diet right now, and so me going on a stupid little daily walk for my stupid physical and mental health, you just get frustrated with trying to live sometimes. You get angry at physical and mental issues that are going on in your life. So there's lots of different things that you can look at, but what's your definition of anger? What do y'all think anger is? Just throw it out there. Uncontrolled temper. Okay, yeah, I like that one. What else?
Anger is fear turned around backwards.
Fear turned around backwards. Okay. Yeah.
I think temperamental and what's temper? One part temper and 2 parts mental.
1 part temper. What did you say? 2 parts mental, 1 part.
1 part temper, 2 parts mental.
Ah, yes. 1 part temper, 2 parts. That's hard to say, but I like it. What else? Anything else that came to mind when you think about anger? Marlon, what do you think? You got something in your head. I know you always have something in your head.
It's one of the ways we show how negative emotions set out.
Okay. When we're hurt? Yeah, that's how we show our emotions. We get angry at things. Well, some of the definitions that when we talk about anger, it's described as a feeling that people experience, just like you were talking about, when something unfair or painful or bad happens to us. And I relate to the unfair thing because that's when a lot of times when I get angry, that's not fair. So that's what Cambridge kind of says. And then another definition from Google is a strong feeling of annoyance. We get annoyed at people a lot. I do. Displeasure or hostility. And even you could even describe it as emotional arousal, like just your emotions are just coming up and you can't stop them. And that definition reminds me of when I was in high school. And all you women in here are going to laugh at this because you're not going to understand. But if you're a guy, you'll understand if you ever got so angry that you put your fist through a wall. Dean knows what I'm talking about. And everybody else who's a guy is not really admitting it. But they've gotten that angry before where you're just like, you got to do something, right? You got to let that out. And that's that emotional arousal that it just sometimes it's uncontrollable in a sense from an anger standpoint.
When I was speaking about fear, I mean, it's where you have the inability to control something or
Yeah.
a situation, and it actually is a form of fear, and you can do nothing but lash out, feel those other feelings that fear of not being able to deal with whatever.
Yeah, it's like an uncontrollable fear. Yeah, it starts to take over, and we'll talk a little bit about that more. We're going to do another little question and answer thing tonight. So if you want to, you can try and scan that and go onto that website, and we'll have a couple of questions. So if you need to zoom in, you can zoom in too. Or you can go to slido.com and plug in that number too. Everybody got it? It's up there on the top left too. So, were you angry this week? Some people have already plugged in a few answers. Yes or no? Just real clear. Were you angry this week? 67% saying yes right now. 70% saying yes. I love it how it goes back and forth. It's really fun when you get like 100 people in here and they're like, just starts doing this. So we're around the 60 to 70% saying, yes, I was angry this week. So that's interesting tell right there. Another question, were you angrier in the past year? So we're talking about this last year. Do you feel like you were angrier last year than you are this year? Whoa, we got maybe just one person answered. Were you angrier in the past year? 67% again. So roughly about that same. We're all recognizing that we have that in our lives. What about, are we angrier than a generation ago? So now thinking back to your parents. No, angrier. Not dumber. Angrier. Think back how it was a generation ago. This is kind of an interesting question to ask because I've got some statistics that follow up after this. So we're a little bit, getting close to the same where we're 64-36 in that range, 60-40, 70-30. So statistics are showing, were you angry in the past year? 42% say no. Saying yes. No, saying 58%. So they're saying, most people are saying they weren't as angry last year as they are this year. And then what I thought was interesting was this one, are we angrier than a generation ago? 84% said yes. 84%. And that was in 2022, so that would have been how you felt in 2021. And this is just, across the spectrum, so society, it's not focused in on Christianity or anything like that, but I just thought it was interesting to think about. There's a lot of people who struggle with these things, and you see it all over. You see it when you're outside, when you see it, you're at the grocery store, you see it when you're on the road, you see it, anywhere in a service industry when people are just so impatient and so angry that they don't get something done exactly right. And it really becomes part of like what Carrie's talking about, this emotion thing, that takes over. It's something that, like happiness, surprise, or sadness, it's an emotion inside you that just that dwells in you. And also has this, we talk about negative provocation. It's usually provoked by some negative event, is when this anger comes out. For example, it occurs when you receive or witness unfair treatment. So if I see somebody being treated unfair, I'll get upset about that. I get, that we got to stop that. It's that type of feeling. Or if there's humiliation or surprise or inconvenience, aggression, etc., towards ourselves or others that we care about, that's when that can really start happening. And then thirdly, it's really a gateway, kind of like a gateway drug. It's a gateway to destructive behavior, is this anger that dwells up inside us. And that's probably the key takeaway when we're talking about this, and a lot of us understand this, but sometimes in the heat of the moment, you don't realize how that's leading to some other things that might happen, some other more destructive emotions and behaviors, like resentment and hatred and revenge and violence that would come from that. So when we're thinking about this, in itself, anger is not a bad thing, right? We all understand that. It's an emotion. Just like being sad or happy, anger is not a bad thing, but what it leads to is it turns this emotion into a sin. Right. It's how you react to it, it's what you do with it. And for many, whoever it is just the go-to emotion, that's how they react to things, whether big or small. So there's various ways to describe those types of angers. Again, these types of angers that I wanted to go into a little bit here, and I'd be interested, Marlon, from your background, if this is kind of what you've been looking or seeing too, even in your studies, but because I thought it was interesting how it broke this down. Hasty and sudden anger, which is more of a reactive thing, when one is threatened or harmed physically or psychologically, you have this reaction of self-preservation, right? So you're just going to react. It's like that fight or flight emotion. That's that hasty anger. The second one is a like settled or deliberate anger. That's more of a reaction to unfair treatment or deliberate harm by another. So this is often refers to as righteous indignation. When you're looking at that, and deliberate anger or a strong desire for justice. And then the third and fourth one, dispositional anger, is really a character trait. That's a person who's constantly irritable. It's the guy or girl that is just always grouchy and just given to a bad temper. That makes me think of, unfortunately, my dad, and I love him, and he's gotten out of, he's gotten better. But when he was stuck in drinking and struggling through alcohol and doing shift work and everything else, that's what I was telling him, because he was irritable, and it was because of all those things going on in his life. And we knew, as my brother and I, it was like, just don't mess with him. Just don't say anything to him. Don't get him to go, just because it'll just that anger will come out right away. And then there's passive aggressive anger, and we all love that, don't we? The passive aggressive people. Anger collected and stored from the small slights and insults that some people feel that others are unconsciously directing at them. And their reaction, these people's reaction, is really just to sabotage any effort to have or improve relationships with people. It's that passive aggressive type of feeling. And the first two types of anger are more episodic. I see Marlon's nodding his head. Means that it's a response to outside stimuli. And to me, that's more of a natural thing. It's when you get into those last two that it starts to talk about one's character more than anything. So when you're talking about passive aggressiveness and dispositional anger, that's a little bit more of a serious thing, because it's probably much more common. Yes, ma'am.
The number two one, the settled, deliberate anger,
Mm-hmm.
that's more like what Jesus did in the temple.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would think so.
Not exactly rage, but that kind
No, not rage. Yeah, but deliberate.
He was very deliberate with that.
Mm-hmm.
the passive aggressive anger thing. A lot of people have. I had trouble with that once. The first time I'd ever gone for help, my counselor said, "You need to look at passive aggressive anger." And I don't get mad. I'm a pretty peaceful guy, and she had a group of, she had me do a panel teaching anger.
Oh, yeah.
Types of anger to my peers, and these youngsters that I thought were kind of, knuckleheads or whatever. After I went through the whole thing of rage and these other things, I said passive aggressive anger, and I went through the symptoms and signs of that kind of comes out as humorous, kind of attempt to be funny about something and not really, facing it. And I didn't, and when I went through all the examples, I said, does anybody see any examples of this passive aggressive anger in me? every one of them right. And I went, well, you know what? And they named off examples. Like the other day, they said, well, when you were looking for your pen the other day, you know, you went through the. You know,
That was a bad question to ask.
But
Notice, I don't have that. I'm not asking y'all that.
Me to look at the fact that
Yeah.
I was afraid to be angry and embrace that I was mad. And so I tried to.
And you do it
paint
passively,
funny,
yeah.
And I'd say something
Yeah.
cute or something when I was really frustrated or kind of didn't have control about something or you know, that whole thing. You know, guys aren't fearful, right? We're not scared of anything, right? Yeah, right. Take a look again. You know.
Yeah, that's a good example. So really what we want to think about the normal state, sometimes if you have those last two, that might be your normal state that you're in. You know, you're always irritable. Yes, sir.
That one on number 2, it has both a negative and a positive side to it.
Uh-huh.
The positive side is the one you talked about where it's the justice, righteous, you know, that kind of thing. The negative side to that is the way the secular psychology of the stuff says it is, if you're doing it for the good of all, then that's what they would say is the good side of it. If you're doing it based on just good for you, then it's not so much always so good because what's good for you might hurt everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I think from the Christian side of this will be based on what God says and what we say.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're doing it just because it makes me upset, but God didn't say that, then even though we're settled and we're deliberate about it, it may not be the best way to go.
Yeah, totally. When you're thinking about that, I like that the way you put it. Yeah, if it's about self, then it's probably not good to start with. Anything about self, we have to really examine that motivation, right, and what that is. The other thing is any of this anger that we talk about tonight. Like I said, it's not bad. It's not inherently bad. It's just what comes of that. And so even in type 2, if you think about deliberate anger, if you think it's justified, what is the action that is justifying? That's the question you have to ask. It's not the anger itself, it's what's the action. And we can look at lots of examples in society, but of course we're here tonight to kind of study examples through the Bible about what we can learn about anger. And so what are some examples that we have from the scriptures that we see of people who dealt with things like this? Anybody have anything that popped in their head or a character in the Bible that dealt with these types of things?
When Peter cut off what's the name's ear, you know, it was.
When Peter cut off, yeah. Yeah, that's. He definitely reacted, didn't he?
Yeah, he reacted to that.
That would have been hasty, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, drew the sword. What else? Anybody else come to mind?
I think when Martha was talking about Mary to Jesus, when she was saying, shouldn't she be helping me?
Yeah.
That was probably passive.
She was annoyed, wasn't she? She was definitely passive. Here I am washing all these dishes. That's a good example.
Samuel, we saw 1 Samuel 11, where it says, Saul heard the word, and the Spirit of God came powerfully upon him, and he persecuted.
Yeah. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Well, maybe not Saul, but maybe somebody else in that general arena, but that's a good one.
Moses made God angry because he kept saying, I can't do this. You've got
Yeah.
the wrong God.
Yeah.
That's not what you tell God.
Whenever he struck the stone to get water.
Ding, ding, ding. I've got that one on my list.
Oh.
Good job. Richard.
When David was about to kill Nabal and Abigail's wife was
Oh, y'all are good. Ding, ding, ding. That's on my list too. And Moses. So the last three of them. So Cain. Okay. There's another one. All right, yeah, Cain. Let's start with Cain then. Genesis. Turn to Genesis 4. Let's look at that real quick. I don't have it queued up, so give me 1 second. look at 1 through 8. We're going to read together. I didn't put them on the slides. So Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel had kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of the flock, and that's good. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering. But on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it." So now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's get out to the field." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. So, what do we think about Cain doing that?
I think differently about it now. Then when I was a child, I thought, well, hey, he was giving me watermelons and stuff, and I thought it was wrong with God. Now I look at it now, I see it's a little different.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you look at what Cain's reaction was, it was why did he react like that? It's because God rejected him, right? Yeah. And so he's got this anger that wells up inside him. In his mind, he was given maybe his best. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't, because God knows. And so, that sacrifice was not acceptable. And that's what he was told. So, anger is a legitimate response to that when rejection is when that happens. So, I'm not surprised that he was hurt and offended. The problem is that how he reacted to it, right? And how he responds to that rejection. Because in verses 6 and 7, you see that God tries to help Cain understand. He tells him what he did wrong, the reason for the rejection of the offering, and he just wasn't listening. He said, "There's a sin in your life that you need to take care of." But he just didn't hear it. He warns him, of danger awaiting him. And that he had to change something in his life. But instead of doing that, he focused in on something else. He focused in on the jealousy of his brother. And that's what happens a lot when we get these anger. Anger dwells into our heart, and then we start blaming others for situations that we put ourselves in. And that's exactly what he did. It festered and it grew into hatred and resentment, just like we talked about. And this repressed anger, it just left to boil. And I know that feeling because I've had that feeling, and it's not fun. It just doesn't feel good. And it's just looking for a way out when it's inside you. And that release is usually directed at some person or someone that's nearby or wasn't even involved in it sometimes. And it could be somebody who's just had a really bad, awful day or just heard some really bad news, and they're driving on the highway, and they're just driving like a maniac without any regard for everybody else. But in Cain's case, it gave birth to that jealousy, which in turn he created. He had rejection and discipline from God. It turned into anger. Okay, we're all right there, and then it transitioned into the bad stuff. It transitioned into jealousy and resentment, and eventually murder.
How do you see the anger of the situation of Jonah? The Lord wanted him to go and warn the folks of Nineveh, much less did Jonah didn't even like the people of Nineveh, much less did he want to bring them in. As he got swallowed by the big and forced to do it.
Yeah.
But there was an anger there that I don't know if that's passive aggressive or just, stubborn.
Stubbornness is probably a lot of Jonah. Yeah, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to go the opposite direction. And God sorted him out. But the other one that Jack mentioned, the other example that I had on the list was Moses. So turn to Numbers chapter 20. Let's read a little bit of that. 1 through 13. So in the first month, the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert of Zin, and they stayed at Kadesh. There Miriam was died and was buried. And now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with Moses and said, "If only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord." Don't they do that a lot? It just reminds me of having kids around sometimes when they're just never happy. "Why did you bring the Lord's community into this desert, that we and our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us out of Egypt to this terrible place? It has no grain or figs, grapevines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." So they are griping up a storm. Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance to the tent of meeting and fell face down. And the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord said to Moses, "Take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water." Speak to that rock, right? Key verse there, and it'll pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community so they and their livestock can drink. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Struck the rock twice. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give you, or give them." So what happened there? Moses was told what? Speak to the rock. Now, this happened before, right? Where he was told to hit the rock. And he did. Now, this time he was told to speak to the rock. Now, okay, misunderstanding, miscommunication. All right. I don't know how God would. He wasn't paying attention, maybe. But why wasn't he paying attention? Because he's got thousands of Israelites around him griping at him. And he's annoyed. And he's frustrated. And he comes out of that tent of meeting just on. I haven't looked at it this way before I read this chapter, but he is probably really irate about having to go to the Lord about this. It's like, why do, you just, oh, fine, I'll go and talk to him. And then he comes out with a solution from the Lord. And then what does he do? He chastises them. What does he say? He says, he said, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" Well, here's the interesting thing. When you think about it, God didn't tell him to go out there and chastise them. He just said, "Hey, go speak to the rock. They'll have what they need."
Also claiming, "Shall we bring water out?"
Good point. Yeah, so that's the first thing. Because of his anger and indignation for the Israelites at that point, he got frustrated to the point where he stopped listening to God's instructions. It all became about him personally and about, you guys are just being jerks, and I'm going to tell you off. And then he turns around and hits that rock twice because he's angry. And then what happens? There's a punishment, right? And that's what happens when we have these acts that come out of anger. Usually there's going to be some circumstances that come from that. And what happened to him?
He wouldn't be able to see the promise.
Right. He was told he wouldn't be able to see the promised land. So he lived for 2 more years. Aaron died. He prepared the Israelites, and then he died looking at the promised land from a hill. Yeah, he was able to see it. And so that's kind of a sad story, because Moses is a great man. He's a great leader, but he's got all these flaws, just like he talked about. Like he didn't want to be a leader. But
This occurs after he had talked with God about not destroying all of them, using him to create the nation of Israel.
That's right. That's right.
So,
Yeah, so when you think about it, he sinned because he admonished the people like I talked about, and he struck the rock twice. Those are the 2 bad things that happened because of what he was dealing with. So he he had frustration, which led to anger. And at that point, that's when we got to realize there's the line in the sand. Stop. Don't go any further. Don't pass go. Because at that point, he went further on. He lost faith because he hit the rock twice instead of just speaking to it. He had disobedience about hitting the rock and about talking to the people. And then he had a punishment from that. So there's natural consequences that God had to pass down because of that disobedience.
Sounds a whole lot like us, right?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Sounds a lot like us.
Think more about ourselves and what we stand for and how we look, rather than doing what God just tells us to do.
Yeah.
Like talking to someone that has a certain sin that you don't like, so you gotta give them a piece of your mind first.
Yep.
Before you're showing love to them.
God had something more in mind.
I love you, but let me tell you what you're doing wrong. Yeah.
God had something in mind like that. You know, in the name of the Lord, I command you to bring forth water, right? You know, instead he mad at people and kind of frustrated at God, and he says, I'll talk to the rock, all right?
Yeah. Yeah. Whack. Yeah. So another example that we talked about was David. And that's where we're talking about David and Saul and everything that went on with David. We all know David, you know, man after God's own heart, but boy, he had struggles, didn't he? He had struggles. And in Numbers 21 through 13, it's kind of long, so I'll try and summarize a little bit of it. 1 Samuel 25, 2 through 42, if you want to read through that later. But it's really just the story, just like Richard was talking about when Daniel was out there. He was crowned king. You know, he's crowned king, and while he is in his ragtag army running around, he was trying to make ends meet. So he was helping some of the local farmers out, like Nabal, and he was keeping them safe from raiders and things of that nature. So while he was doing that, he kind of expected payment, and so he sent some of his army over to Nabal to ask for payment for some sheep and some things that, you know, and food and things like that. Well, while they were there, Nabal just basically said, "Are you crazy? You didn't do anything for me." And he's this rich businessman who owned livestock. I mean, he should have had plenty of ability to do that. Sorry, wrong verse. If you go to 1 Samuel 25 and 9, you kind of see Nabal's response here, and I'll read it. When David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all these words in David's name, and then they waited for the response. And Nabal answered David's servants and said, "Who is David?" That's kind of an insult. "And who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are each breaking away from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have slaughtered from my shearers and give it to men whose origin I don't even know?" So David's young men retraced their way back, and they came and told him according to all these words. And David said to his men, "Each of you gird on his sword." So each man girded on the sword, and David also girded on his sword, and about 400 men went up behind David, and 200 stayed with the baggage. So he was rather ticked off, wasn't he? He did not like that response. And David's reaction in 22, he says this, "May God do so to the enemies of David and more also, if by morning I leave as much as one male of anyone who belongs to him." He was fuming angry, like killing angry. He was going to wipe them out. And it was kindled by a few different things. Again, injustice, like we talked about. That's not fair. I did all these things for you, Nabal. I protected you, and I expected payment. And the way you reacted to me was just unfair. It's injustice. He was being denied what he was due. You can relate to that in anything. Like if you got passed over for a promotion at work, some other guy got a new car that you thought you deserved for some reason. You know, there's things like that. The recognition at work for something that you did and that somebody else got the recognition for. Those are some things where you think injustice. The other thing is frustration. Frustration is just when, his work would not yield any of the supplies. He was frustrated about his men not getting food. And he wanted to care for their families. And then the third thing, insult. He was insulted by Nabal. And that's probably, I think, what threw him over the edge. I put myself back in that time frame, but that could probably be the worst thing you can do is insult the king. And dismissed his claim to the throne and referred to him as a runaway slave. Yeah, that's pretty insulting. So he was immediately consumed by this anger, and he's like, strap on your swords, boys, we're going. Just think that, and it leads him to automatically seek revenge. So the story changes then, and Abigail comes into the picture. Thank God for Abigail. She saved a lot of people's lives from what she did. That's Nabal's wife. So she was able to prevent David from committing this terrible reaction that he had. She learns of the situation, she prepares the needed supplies, and she goes out and meets David's men, and she appeals to him. And she says, and this is in 28, please forgive the transgression of your maidservant, for the Lord will certainly make for my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil will not be found in you all your days. Should anyone rise up to pursue you to seek your life, then the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living with the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord does for my Lord, according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and appoints you ruler over Israel, this will not cause grief or a troubled heart to my Lord, both by having shed blood without cause and by my Lord having avenged himself. When the Lord deals well with my Lord, then remember your maidservant. And so she diffuses the situation immediately. Smart woman. She realizes what her husband did was completely wrong, and she's fearful for everybody losing their life. She apologizes. She takes responsibility for Nabal's actions.
Didn't David marry her?
Yeah. Interesting twist, huh? He saw that she was probably a wise woman. So she brings all the supplies and she acknowledges that insult and warns. Here's the key thing. She warns David in that verse about the consequences if he continues on that path of revenge, which I hadn't really thought about it that way before. I was like, that was probably the most important thing. What is going to result in his hasty revenge? He'd have the innocent blood of Nabal's workers on his hands. And so, she asked him to remember her when he becomes king. So again, she acknowledges that true position that he has. And again, like we talked about, he ends up taking her as his wife because Nabal actually dies of a heart attack. And we're talking about revenge in our class on Sunday mornings. And we're talking about how we need to let God take care of things and just step back from things. And God took care of that situation. And but you have to realize the story of David and Abigail is really just shows how quickly sudden anger can overtake, and it's this immediate response that can just come out of people and can lead to disaster. And you think about nowadays what road rage is. There was a shooting today outside of Bowie High School in Arlington. And the whole high school was shut down and locked down, and there's this big commotion, obviously. And all I could take about from what they figured out was there was a shooting outside the high school, and it wasn't students, it was just two guys that were in a rage. Somebody was angry at another person. And so, these things happen. But there are some practical steps that we can talk about. David's anger kindled by injustice. We talked about that. These are some practical steps that we can see. And it's really simple stuff, right? It's just simple. It's not rocket science. Again, pray. But don't pray about God dealing with the person who you're angry about. pray about God dealing with you and to make sure I don't do anything stupid. And that's where it's hard to like turn that around on you in that tense moment. You should be seeking wisdom and understanding as to why we are angry, not just make that guy pay. And the second thing to do is really just slow down. And I wish I'd had these things when I was in high school. I probably would have done less stupid stuff if I just slowed down. Stop acting and reacting quickly. Get control of yourselves. David was able to take that long ride to Nabal's house. Thankfully, it was a long ride, and Abigail was able to head him off. And you think about the concept of give something 24 hours to cool off, right? When you're angry. You ever heard that? And that's actually a concept that I used in Little League. Everything goes back to Little League somehow. When I was coaching. Yeah, don't go to bed angry. Yeah, 24 hours. So the 24-hour rule in Little League was, as I was a coach, if after a game, parents were not allowed to talk to me at all for 24 hours. After that, they can call me and discuss anything they want to. And usually, that works out okay, because after 24 hours, they're probably simmered down, or after whatever happens. It usually worked pretty well. Because you can avoid allowing it to create problems. And the third thing is stop churning. Now you're thinking about like making butter or ice cream. You got this churning machine that just keeps agitating things, right? It's agitating, and it will keep doing it. It's going to keep turning things over. And just think about in your head as you turn things over that upset you. Even if there's already a resolution to it, and you've given it to God, and you've walked away, and your mind still does tricks on you, and it still brings it up. And that's Satan in there just kind of re-agitate that anger and that And you've got to stop churning over the situation and over in your mind. It keeps this fire of anger inside you. And it's an emotional prison that you can't escape from. And Paul even says that in Ephesians 4, he says, be angry and sin not, and don't let the sun go down on your anger, right? That's what you were just talking about. And that's something that Regina and I have always talked about in our marriage, too. It's like we've stayed up pretty late some nights working out things because we just felt it wasn't right to like go to bed with being angry at each other for whatever reason. But it also kind of means for a specific time or season as well. Don't let anger go beyond its normal time. You can be angry for more than one day, yeah. But if it's past its normal time, you need to realize that. And if you let it continue to churn inside you, that's going to continue to bring violence and revenge and resentment into your head. Let's see, Proverbs 19:11, a man's discretion makes him slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook a transgression. And I really love that verse to end on because it means a lot to me to say his glory. It is his glory to overlook a transgression. And when you're in the heat of a moment and you're getting upset and irritated with somebody, just think of it as glorifying your God by being able to walk away. It's just kind of an interesting concept. So maybe that will stick in our heads next time that happens to us at McDonald's or on the freeway. And I've been studying this for a few days now, and I've let people go in front of me in the freeway, and it's just like, hi, go ahead. It's been kind of nice. It didn't upset me because I was trying to glorify them, by saying, okay, go ahead. So, just do these things, and it'll help. And another thing is be your Christian self. If you're a Christian, what are you supposed to do in these situations? That's kind of a good thing to think about when you're in the heat of a moment. What would Christ do? So next week we're going to talk a little bit about cursing, and Scott's going to be able to take over for a couple of weeks. So anything else anybody wants to share? All right, don't be angry. Thanks a lot.